We are live. Good morning. This is Senate Judiciary. It is about 11:30. Sorry for the lateness and sorry for making you wait. And it's not our fault. It is the fault of the Senate itself and the number of bills that were on the floor. So we're taking up Proposition 4, which is a constitutional amendment dealing with rights. And we have a number of people who would like to speak, I think, this morning briefly. And I mean briefly, because I'd like to get it out today. I don't want to keep it hanging around here for another week and a half, 2 weeks. So, who would like, why don't we do it this way? Why don't we do markup? Eric?
Yeah.
Why don't you take the seat and we'll do our usual Senate Judiciary markup. And after Eric goes through the highlighted changes, which are very few, I'll ask comments from anybody in the audience, including those on Zoom.
Shall I get started, Senators?
Please.
Alrighty. Good morning, everybody. Eric Fitzpatrick with the Office of Legislative Counsel, here to walk the committee through the most recent changes to Proposal 4, which, as the chair mentioned, is a proposal to amend the Constitution of the state of Vermont to enact essentially a parallel equal protection clause, which exists in the federal United States Constitution. And the proposal that you have in front of you is to enact a provision in the state constitution, the Constitution of Vermont, that would have a similar concept and would put forward a requirement. And this is the language that you see, the operative language. I'm going to jump ahead before there's the first highlighted piece in the statement of on page 1, the statement of purpose. But before we get to that, I just want to mention generally what this is about. It's been a while since we've looked at this. And generally speaking, this provides that the people are, and I'm on page 2, line 14, this is the substance of this proposal, that provides in a new Article 23 that would be entitled that the people are guaranteed equal protection under the law. So as I mentioned, this is a parallel equal protection clause, a long-standing provision in the United States Constitution and in the Constitution of a number of other states. This proposes to add one to the Vermont Constitution. Operative language is the next sentence. States shall not deny equal treatment and respect under the law on account of, and then it lists a number of what are often referred to as protected categories. These are particular classifications, categories, on the basis of which the state would be prohibited from denying equal protection. And what are those categories? You'll see one of them is added. I'll get to that in a moment. But the categories are: state can't deny equal treatment and respect under the law on account of a person's race, ethnicity, sex, religion, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, or national origin. Now, the reason that religion is highlighted, you may recall, is that the initial version of the proposal that the committee looked at did not have religion in there as a protected category, protected class. However, the version of Prop 4 that was introduced in 2019 did have religion in it. So it wasn't entirely new to the committee to have that be a protected class. Just I think the committee instructed last time to go ahead and add that piece, the religion category, to this version of the bill as well. So that's what was done there. That's why that is highlighted. So that's the essence of it. I know you're wanting to move quickly, Senators, so I'll just quickly note, I won't talk about the purpose right now. I'll just mention back on page 1, you'll see line 11, religion is added in the statement of purpose as well, just for the same reason that I mentioned. The other change over on page 2, the other two changes, you'll see lines 12 and 13 are highlighted. That's because you may also recall that the previous version of this constitutional proposal did not create a separate article in the Constitution the way this one does. And see, this proposes a separate standalone article, Article 23, Equality of Rights. The same way you did for the Reproductive Rights Amendment, you created an Article 22 several years ago. The last version of the bill that you looked at didn't have this as a separate article. It sort of worked the language into the existing Common Benefits Clause, a different portion of the existing constitutional law. This creates the new article. And lastly, the highlighted sentence that you see at the bottom of page 2, This sentence highlighted. This was also in the 2019 version of Article 19. The 2019 version of Proposal 4 was not in the initial version of Prop 4 that you're looking at this year. And I think the committee was still thinking about whether or not to add that. So it's highlighted. I think you're still trying to decide whether or not to add that.
This would allow the legislature, if it so desired, to do certain things for certain groups that have been historically subject to discrimination.
That's exactly right, Senator.
So that covers a multitude of things.
As an example, maybe let's say a state-sponsored college wanted to have an affirmative action program,
or
something like
even
that.
though the Supreme Court has made rulings about affirmative action.
Well,
The U.S. Supreme Court.
That's the interesting point, is that although that language would provide that would not be a violation of the Vermont Constitution, if it still violated the federal Constitution.
Say it was reparations.
Yes, good point.
There was a bill on reparations.
Right.
That would allow that.
Right.
It wouldn't be considered to be
a violation of this constitutional provision. That's right. Now, you're right, someone could still challenge that under the Federal Equal Protection Clause, but that's out of our hands.
Because the United States Supreme Court has done, I'll use the phrase damage, but some people think they've done good work. I don't, on some of these grades. Anyway, that's just my personal opinion, not the committee. All right, so briefly, any comments from anybody in the audience who's here in person? And first of all, state your name and if you have an organization. You and then you.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Senators. Harrison Stark, I'm an attorney with the ACLU. We had proposed a number of changes. I don't know if folks have a copy of our testimony, our proposed changes, but we have hard copies here. When this constitutional amendment was first suggested and advocates testified about it, the intent behind it was described as wanting to do everything in Vermont's power to protect individuals based on particular characteristics in ways that the federal Constitution has so far failed to do and might fail to do further. As you said, Senator Sears, that the Supreme Court is weakening federal equal protection even more. And so the changes that we proposed are really intended to just effectuate that purpose and make sure that any constitutional amendment that Vermont passes provides the maximum protection possible for individuals. And there's a couple different ways that this does this. One is standalone article, which this version does. A key change that we propose, and that is consistent with both the purpose and the testimony of other civil rights advocates, is to make clear that it prohibits discrimination in intent and effect. The reason for that is that one of the chief limitations of the Federal Equal Protection Clause and one of the chief criticisms of it for civil rights advocates over the last several decades is that the Federal Equal Protection Clause only prohibits intentional discrimination, which is traditionally extraordinarily difficult to prove. What this would say is that individuals can vindicate their rights when they're discriminated against without having to meet that same high bar for showing purposeful discrimination that the Federal Equal Protection Clause requires. We also propose self-execution, which would just make clear that individuals can enforce this in court absent implementing legislation. And there's a couple of other changes, but the one that I wanted to highlight is, I know that this committee had wrestled earlier with the inclusion of religion, just because the intent of this amendment had been described as wanting to provide protection for individuals who thus far had lacked protection under the Vermont Constitution. And as the committee has heard from a couple individuals and written testimony from Professor Teachout, Article 3 of the Vermont Constitution already protects religious liberty. And so what we suggested is modeling an approach that New York has done in its proposed Equal Rights Amendment, which is to say, religion is of course a characteristic that is deserving of protection, just as gender race, disability status, gender identity. But what this does is it says when we're protecting religion through this statement of values, courts can continue to use the existing jurisprudence for religious liberty that exists currently in Article 3.
Okay. All right, we'll consider that. I've just made a copy of the ACLU's proposal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lisa?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, Renee McGinnis
Renee.
from, yes, Renee from, McGinnis from Vermont Family Alliance. And just a couple of comments. Again, the purpose section of the bill was skipped over, and I think that's critical to understanding the intent behind this bill. I can point to on page 2, section B. So this amendment intends to serve as a foundation for protecting the rights and dignity of historically marginalized populations and addressing existing inequalities. If this proposition moves forward, I would ask that under Article 6, Chapter 1 of the Vermont State Constitution, that you disseminate information to the public on your intent and what addressing existing inequalities might mean in forthcoming legislation under Proposition 4, and whether or not the forthcoming legislation under Proposition 4 to address existing inequalities would cost money to implement. And I feel like the public deserves to know that before they vote on this constitutional amendment. The purpose section does not appear on the ballot on which they are voting on. And then secondly, there's a concern with, even if you pass Proposition 4, institute affirmative actions at a state college, say, that someone will, eventually it could be challenged, and the taxpayers, again, pay for the state's defense. I think the Supreme Court has already established a precedent with their decision on students for fair admissions against Harvard and UNC, and that decision, I think we already know what the outcome is likely to be at the Supreme Court level. So I would ask you to consider whether or not you want to advance a proposition and legislation after that will be challenged, rightfully so, as unconstitutional. The U.S. is the supreme law of the land. Any affirmative action at a state college will be challenged, and then the taxpayers have to pay for the state's defense. So
yeah, but that comes at, I mean, if we don't have, under the common benefits clause, one could argue that there is that ability. So, we can see what happens if we do. First of all, we have to pass Proposition 4 and the people have to vote for it. Secondly, as I understand it, somebody would need to propose to have affirmative action at Vermont state colleges. I mean, we're already giving certain benefits to state residents. It's not affirmative action, but we're giving state residents benefits at our state colleges and our universities, so nobody's challenged that. But I suppose some out-of-staters might.
Thank you for taking my comments, I appreciate it.
Pardon me?
I appreciate the time to speak. I wasn't expecting that at all, so I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.
Anyway, anybody else who'd like to speak? Yes.
Carrie Brown, Executive Director of the Vermont Commission on Women. Just saying that that we support the amendment that you have in front of you. And if you choose to discuss further amendments, we would love the opportunity to weigh in on that.
Okay. Is anybody on Zoom?
Reverend Hughes is on Zoom.
Eric, does the House get an opportunity to make changes?
I don't believe so. I don't think so. I think it's up or down.
Yeah. Okay. All right, I don't see anybody on Zoom. So, let's first take a look at the proposal. We do have a proposal from Reverend Hughes that you may have seen.
I actually just received updated language from him about 5 minutes ago. I'm printing it.
Well, time is fleeting. I'm inclined to go with what's in front of us personally, but if you want to discuss any of the amendments, that proposed them strike out. Mark proposed strike all. I've got his 3/1/2024. Do you have, where is that?
I just posted it and I'm trying to print that right now. I think it did a lot.
Oh, I've got it, it's on our webpage. It's the same thing, isn't it?
You said it was the latest version. I don't know.
Well, maybe.
Just a quick question for Eric, Senator Sears. Eric, can you just remind me again, or just provide further clarity about the difference between Article 3 and how that operates compared to what this would do if we include religion in this proposed Article 23? Because I know that the compelled support clause is one of the main components of Article 3. And so will there be a difference between how this impacts specifically religion compared to Article 3?
Yeah, I think so. I think that the equal protection nature of this is quite specific, and that some of the ways in which like you mentioned, the compelled support principle, and that other principles that are in Article 3 are distinct from whether or not religion can be a basis for a government classification, which here you're saying is that the idea is that equal treatment can't be denied on the basis of religion. So I think there's going to be distinct judicial approaches to that, in the same way that over the years, sort of jurisprudence has developed under equal protection type analysis. In other words, it's sort of a whether or not a government action or program or state action of some sort is having a negative effect on someone on the basis of their belonging to one of these classes wouldn't necessarily come up in an Article 3 type analysis.
Okay,
So,
just wanted to confirm that. Thank
Yeah.
you.
the ACLU has proposed that in intent to add intent, in adding in intent and effect or effect in the article, so that it would read, the government shall not deny equal treatment and respect under the law in intent or effect. Isn't that what we already have?
No, I think the proposal is to put, like, it would be on line, let's see, it would be on line 15 of page 2. Here it says, the state shall not deny equal treatment and respect under the law. And after the word law, the proposal would be to add in intent or effect on account of a person's, et cetera, et cetera.
What do you committee think?
I'm certainly not opposed to it. I
I'm
think,
okay with that.
yeah.
All right.
Question for Eric regarding this. Are there circumstances in which government can unintentionally burden different categories for the purpose of enforcing the laws that are passed? So let me rephrase it.
Yeah.
I know that sometimes there is intent, like when something on its face creates a burden or is discriminatory.
Right.
There are also, I believe, other categories that can be unintentionally burdened. And I was wondering if you're able to distinguish where those happen, or if they do happen, or just any additional thoughts on this.
I couldn't give you an exhaustive list, but yes, I think there are times when, even without the intent language, that a government action could be held as unlawful either statutorily or constitutionally. For example, a law that had the effect of burdening the free exercise of religion, just picking up one example, an existing First Amendment constitutional law. There are times when it isn't necessary that the law is intending to target the exercise of someone's religion, but nevertheless, it could conceivably be a constitutional violation. I don't have an exhaustive list, so I couldn't say whether, I'm sort of extrapolating what your question might be, Senator, but kind of getting at the idea of if you don't say or affect, for example, might someone still be able to make a claim that a state action violated this new equal protection clause, even though it wasn't intended to, but it has that effect? Or the opposite, sort of the other side of that coin is, it could be, that would certainly potentially broaden it in the sense that a government action that wasn't intended to discriminate on the basis of someone's race, say, or religion, or any one of the other classes that you have listed here, might still be unconstitutional if it had the effect of discriminating against someone on the basis of their race, religion, etc. Whether or not you want to include it and be that broad is a policy decision for you. But I think is that kind of what you're getting at? Is that what might be the effects of including the word? So I use the word effects twice. There might be the consequences is a better word for using the word effect. Yeah, I think it would be broader. But that may be what you want. It's a policy of, it's sort of difficult to kind of think about all the possible consequences of what that might be, but I think you have a broader range of possible consequences if you have that language, which you may like, you may prefer.
Mrs. Stark?
Just if it's helpful, Senator, I think one example could be if you imagine a government program that says we're only going to give this benefit to anyone who's been a Vermonter for 25 years. That is something that would have a disparate impact on local refugee populations, recent immigrants, folks who are just not as well established in terms of their family ties in Vermont. Under the federal equal protection clause, that could only be invalidated if you could show that the reason for the legislature passing that benefit in the first place was precisely in order to disadvantage a particular group. Whereas under an intent or effect standard, what a court would say is, well, sort of regardless of whether or not this was intended to be discriminatory, because this clearly disadvantages and excludes an enormous population based on their national origin, based on race, either it can't stand or the government needs to adjust it in some way. And I should say that under disparate impact law, the fact that a government program differentially burdens a particular group does not necessarily bar the program entirely. It just means that there's a presumption that you need to show more that it's necessary.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I'm inclined to, it's 5 minutes at 12. Once again, we're running out of time. Which is...
Time is fleeting, as you said earlier, Senator. That's
It is.
a great way to put it.
I don't have a problem with adding intent and effect, but I do have, I'm not sure I understand self-executing. Nor do I favor adding, I don't particularly, but the committee might wish to add the economic hardship as a protected category. I'm not sure what the impact would be. And I'm not sure how one defines that. There are times in my life where I feel economic hardship and other times when I don't. Usually that's when tax time comes. We already had it. We will get to Reverend Hughes, unfortunately. It's 3 minutes of, and I don't want to cut you off, Mark. So if you could prepare a new version with the those words.
Sure.
Intent and effect.
Yep.
It seems to be the committee's wish. Mark, if you want a 2 minutes, that's fine. Otherwise, I'll need to get to you the next time. I'm sorry. We were held on the floor hostage for an extended length of time.
It's a long floor session.
It was.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm the executive director of the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, and I appreciate you working hard and what you guys are doing on this particular amendment. I think you have a copy of the starkly different proposal that we put forward. I think at its essence, really what we're looking at is we're trying to map this thing back to our intent. I think in this 1 minute or minute and a half before you go, I just would say that tying it back to systemic racism and other forms of systemic oppression is important because at the end of the day, how we look back at these constitutional amendments, particularly judiciarily, is going to be incredibly important. I came prepared to name off a couple of other constitutional amendments that kind of got lost. We can talk about those later, but systemic racism and other forms of systemic oppression create wealth disparities and indirectly affect health and wellness. They threaten economic growth and development, and they ultimately place democracy at risk. Also, while the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause has provided a legal framework for challenging disparate outcomes created by systemic racism and other forms of oppression, its effectiveness is limited by the various factors, including judicial interpretation, amongst others. The state constitutional amendment, including an equal protection clause, could lay the groundwork in creating an alternative parallel approach to the 14th Amendment equal protection basic analysis doctrine. This could assist Vermont in the creation of survivability of corrective policy, sustaining the protection of existing civil rights, as well as expanding the civil rights of protected classifications and new classifications, and repelling new discriminatory algorithms and further perpetuate perpetuates systemic racism by producing indefensible disparate outcomes. So explicitly stating the intent to eradicate systemic racism, it can guide the courts and policymakers in interpreting and applying the constitutional amendment. It provides a framework for assessing the constitutionality of the laws and policies and practices, and also ensuring that they align with the goal of combating systemic or racial discrimination and promoting equity. Again, you have our proposed language.
Okay.
We do agree with the recommendations that have been put forward by the ACLU. It's our sincere hope that this body is able to tie the work of this amendment into purpose, and the purpose is very clear as our judges and prosecutors look back and moving forward on this. Thank you. Hope you have a great remainder of the day.
Thank you. It's afternoon. I feel just noontime. Eric, can I ask you to do some work between now and the next time we deal with this and
Sure.
help me understand? What I see here is more legislation than constitutional amendment.
I don't know if I've seen that, yeah.
Looking at it, yeah, I'm not sure I've seen it either. Is
On the
this the-
systematic racism being added to them.
Yeah, I'll look at it. I haven't seen it myself, but I'll look at it.
Well, we've got copies.
I just posted it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Don.
Then perhaps consult with Professor Ticho.
Yeah.